The Duke of Calderwood was 3 sentences into the story of his own house when Eleanor Ward, who had been seated below the salt and told twice that morning to speak to no one above a baron, set down her spoon and said, quite clearly, "Forgive me, Your Grace." But that is not what happened. The table went the particular silence of 30 people, deciding at once not to breathe. A footman froze mid-pour, the wine trembling at the lip of the bottle. Somewhere down the board a fork was set against a plate, with a click that sounded, in that hush, like a pistol cocked. At the head of the long mahogany, beneath the very portrait he had been describing, the Duke turned his amber eyes down the length of polished wood, candle by candle, to find the woman who had contradicted him, and Eleanor understood, a heartbeat too late, that there had been a warning she had not been given, that the lady who had hissed "Speak to no one above a baron" had meant it as a kindness and not a slight, that one did not correct the Duke at his own table, ever, on any subject, and least of all on the founding of his line. The dowager beside her had gone the colour of ash. "The first Calderwood," the Duke repeated, with the patience of a man who has never once been wrong in this room, was granted these acres by His Majesty Charles II for loyalty to the crown in the late wars. "There is a charter. It hangs in my hall. You have perhaps walked past it tonight." "I have," Eleanor said. "It is a handsome thing, and it is genuine, and it does not say what you have been told it says. Your first ancestor did not receive these acres for loyalty to the king. He received them in 1652, 8 years before there was a king to be loyal to from the Commonwealth, out of lands sequestered from a royalist named Edmund Falker, who had held them 300 years, and was hanged for keeping faith with the man you say your family bled for." She heard her own voice and could not stop it. Truth, in her, had always been stronger than sense. "The cavalier in that story, Your Grace, was the man your house dispossessed. Your charter is dated. Anyone may read the year. She had ruined herself. She knew it in the way the silence changed, curdling toward the pleasure a room full of frightened people takes in watching one of their number be destroyed, so that it need not be them. She gathered her skirts to rise and go before he could have her removed. The Duke of Calderwood laughed. It was not a courtesy. It came out of him startled and entirely real, a single astonished bark that he seemed as surprised by as anyone, and he set down his glass and leaned forward with both forearms on the table like a boy, and the 30 guests stared at him as though he had stood up and removed his coat. 1652, he said. Sequestered, from a royalist. He said it the way another man might taste a wine he had been assured was vinegar. Do you know, in 34 years not one soul at this table has told me that. They have let me stand under that frame and lie to my own dinner guests. His eyes had not left her, and there was nothing in them she had braced for, no fury, no ice, only a sharp, bright hunger she had no name for and no defense against. "You are leaving. I can see you mean to leave. Sit down first and tell me your name." But Eleanor had already gained the door, because a woman with one secret to keep does not give her name to a man who looks at her like that, and she went up the back stairs 2 at a time with her heart going like a hare's, and did not stop until she had shut the muniment room behind her and put her back against the door. For the secret was this: the Duke of Calderwood had not engaged a young woman to set his archive in order. He had engaged, by letter, through his solicitor, a respected antiquarian named Mr. Aldous Vane, author of 4 well-regarded volumes on the histories of the Northern Hundreds. And Mr. Vane did not exist. Mr. Vane was a name Eleanor had bought herself 6 years before, with her father's death and her father's learning, and the plain fact that no publisher in England would print a county history written by a clergyman's penniless daughter. Mr. Vane was unwell, she had written. Mr. Vane regretted he could not travel. Mr. Vane would send his assistant, a Miss Ward, to do the cataloguing under his direction. and Miss Ward had come to Calderwood Hall to spend 3 quiet months among the dead and their documents, earning her 50 guineas, troubling no one, and had lasted exactly 1 dinner before opening her mouth. She did not sleep. She lay listening to the house and rehearsing her departure, and in the morning, instead of the dismissal she expected, a footman brought a note in a slashing, impatient hand. The muniment room is yours for as long as the work requires. Do not leave the house. I have a great many questions. See, she stayed. She told herself it was the 50 guineas. The muniment room ran the length of the east wing, a cold stone gallery lined floor to rafter with chests and boxes and the bundled string tied. Dust-furred records of 600 years, and it was, to Eleanor, the most beautiful room she had ever entered. She had been at work an hour, her father's bone-handled reading glass on its ribbon round her neck, and her sleeves pinned back and ink already on her fingers, when the door opened without a knock, and the Duke came in carrying his own coat over his arm like a man who meant to stay. "You said the charter was dated," he said, without greeting. "Show me how you read a date on a thing 600 years old. I have looked at these boxes my whole life and seen nothing but my own name spelt badly. Teach me to see what you see." It was not what a duke said to a hired cataloguer. She ought to have curtsied and deflected. Instead, she found herself unrolling a deed across the table, and weighting its corners, and lifting the reading glass to her eye, and forgetting within minutes to be afraid of him at all. Which was, she would think much later, the single most dangerous thing she ever did. "The hand tells you the century," she said. "The seal tells you the reign. The Latin tells you the lawyer was lazy. And this," she touched a brown stain at the fold, "tells you it sat in a damp chest under a leaking roof for 100 years, which means someone stopped caring about it, which is its own kind of fact." She glanced up and found him watching not the deed but her, with that same bright hunger, and she felt it go through her like cold water and warm water at once. "You are not attending, Your Grace." "I am attending entirely," he said. "Go on. What stopped them caring?" He came every day after that. He brought his own questions and, increasingly, his own arguments, and he did not once flinch when she told him he was wrong, which she did often, because he frequently was and because no one had ever taught him otherwise. "You enjoy it," he accused her one grey afternoon, when she had just demolished his fond theory that a tower in his park was Norman. "Telling me I am mistaken. You take a positive pleasure in it." "I take pleasure in the tower being Tudor, Your Grace." "Which it is." "Your enjoyment is not my concern. It is brick," he said. "I have always been told it was Norman." "You have always been told a great many things. The Normans did not build in brick in this county. They had not the kilns. Someone in your family wished to be older than they were, and raised a sham keep to prove it, which is the most honest thing I have yet learned about your house." She set down her glass and looked at him squarely. "You may have it Norman if it pleases you. It will simply go on being Tudor while you do." He was quiet a moment, and then he laughed the way he had laughed at the table, surprised and entire. "No one talks to me as you do. Do you know that? In 34 years. Then someone ought to have. Years ago," Eleanor said, "and saved you the embarrassment of the tower, and bent back to her work, and did not see, would not let herself see, the look he gave the top of her head, which was not the look a duke gives a cataloguer." His great-aunt, the Dowager Lady Stroud, took to sitting in the corner with her needlework and her terrible eyes, ostensibly as chaperone, in truth because she had not been so entertained in 20 years. "He has had nothing but yes since the cradle," the old woman told Eleanor one afternoon when the Duke had gone. "Yes, Your Grace. How right you are, Your Grace." His mother yesed him. His tutors yesed him. The woman he nearly married yesed him so prettily he believed her for a year and a half before he found out she could not bear the smell of his dogs and had been pretending to weep at his poetry. "You said no to him over the soup in front of 30 people. The Dowager bit her thread. Child, he will not recover. Eleanor told herself the old woman was a romantic. She told herself a great many things in those weeks, and unsaid them at night, and was very tired. The forgery she found on a Tuesday. It was in a chest that should have held nothing of interest, the routine conveyances of a minor manor called Edenhall, 3,000 a year of good arable that had come to the Calderwoods in the last century, and sat now, quietly, in the entail. Among the genuine deeds, and she knew them genuine the way she knew her own hands, lay a single charter, finer than the rest, purporting to settle Edenhall in 1660, not upon the Duke's direct line, but upon the heirs male of a cadet branch, failing which it reverted. It was beautiful work. It would have fooled a solicitor, a judge, very nearly anyone in England. It did not fool Eleanor, and it did not fool her slowly. She felt the wrongness before she could name it. The way one feels a stare that is not where the foot expects. The paper too white at the edges where 6 decades of true documents had gone the colour of weak tea. The ink sitting too crisp on the surface instead of bitten into the fibre by time. She put her father's glass to the green wax of its seal, and her hand stopped over it, and the room went very quiet around her. There were the arms of the sea. Impressed by a matrix, she had handled the genuine impressions of 100 times, in libraries from Carlisle to York, and there, in the legend that ringed it, was the broken letter she knew as well as her own initials, a flaw in the die she had written 4 pages about, under the name Vane, in a monograph that named the exact year the goldsmith Anthony Reeve had cut that broken matrix to replace its worn predecessor. 1691. The charter above it was dated 1660, the year the king came home. The man who engraved that seal had not yet been born when the document it certified was supposedly written, and the wax that bore his flawed letter would not be pressed for 31 years. Someone had made this recently and placed it in her chest for her to find, or, worse, not expecting her to be the one person in 3 counties who could date a bishop's seal by eye. She was still bent over it, glass in hand, when she heard the door and looked up into the face of a man she had not met, pleasant, fair, perhaps 32, with the Duke's amber eyes set in a softer, hungrier face. "Miss Ward," he said warmly, holding out his hand though he came no closer. "Crispin Stratton, my cousin's heir, until he troubles himself to marry, which God and his temper forbid. I hear you have a gift for old paper." His eyes went, just once, to the charter under her glass, and the warmth in them did not change at all, which was how she knew. "I do hope you are not tiring yourself over trifles." "Only trifles," Eleanor said, and laid a blank sheet over the seal as though to protect it from the light, and smiled at him, and felt the whole shape of the thing arrive in her at once, that the false history she had punctured at dinner and the false charter under her hand were the same lie wearing 2 coats, and that she had just told its author, with a smile, that she could read it. She should have gone to the Duke that hour, in daylight, with witnesses and a locked box between them. Instead, she stayed in the muniment room past midnight with a single candle, copying the forged charter line by line in her own hand, so that if the original vanished she would still have its measure, and she did not hear the door until his voice came out of the dark. "You will ruin your eyes," the Duke said. He carried a branch of candles and wore no coat, and had about him the loosened, sleepless look of a man who had given up on his bed. "Lady Stroud informs me you have not come down to eat since Tuesday, and that it is my fault for letting you find whatever you have found. So I have come to find it too. Will you show me, or must I dismiss you for insubordination and read it myself, badly, and be wrong in front of you forever?" She should have refused. She unrolled the thing instead, and set her father's glass to the seal, and made him bend close, and told him what it was, the matrix that could not exist, the year that could not be, and she felt him go very still beside her as the meaning of it reached him, the cousin's hand inside his own archive, the quiet theft of 3,000 a year dressed up as history. He was a boy in this house with me, the Duke said at last, low. I taught him to ride. I have spent my life being told I am loved and discovering, each time, that it was the dukedom that was loved, and me they tolerated for being attached to it. My mother, my tutors, a woman I nearly married, who wept so beautifully at my verses that I believed her a year before I learned she could not abide the smell of my dogs, and had practiced the weeping before a glass. He laughed, but it had no flaw under it. I had thought Crispin at least wanted nothing from me but my company. He wanted this. He has wanted it the whole time. With his easy face, in my own muniment room, he turned his head, and they were very close, the two candles between them and the cold stone and 600 years of other people's dead, and his eyes moved over her face with that bright hunger gone soft and bare. And you wanted 50 guineas, and to be let alone, and you stood up over the soup and told me the truth at the cost of your own neck, when every other soul I have ever fed has told me only what kept them in the warm. Do you know what that is, Eleanor, to a man like me? Have you the faintest idea what you are? Your Grace, she began, and did not finish, because his hand had come up and his thumb had touched the ink at the corner of her mouth as though to read it, and the air went out of the long room entirely, and she did not step back, which was the whole of her crime. She did not step back, and out in the corridor a floorboard took a slow, deliberate weight, and a line of candlelight slid under the door and paused there, listening, and was gone. Someone had passed, someone had seen the light, and known the room, and known that the Duke of Calderwood was shut inside it past midnight, with an unmarried woman of no family, which in this country was not a private thing but a loaded one, a thing that could be spent. They came apart. Eleanor's heart was going like a hare's again, and the Duke looked at the door with a face gone suddenly old, because he above all men knew what a single-seen candle could be made to mean. Go up the back stair, he said quietly. Now, before it has a name to give you. She went, but she knew the footstep had been light and unhurried, and entirely unsurprised, and she knew whose it was, and so, she saw in his face, did he. His move came within the week, and it was clever, because it did not touch the charter at all. It touched her. The Duke summoned her to the library, and he was not alone. Crispin stood at the window with his hands behind his back, and a third man, the family solicitor, sat with a letter open before him, and the Duke's face had changed, the brightness gone behind a ducal flatness she had not seen since the dinner. Miss Ward, he said, my cousin has raised a question I am obliged to put to you. You came to this house as assistant to a Mr. Aldous Vane, the antiquarian, whom my late father engaged. He paused. Mr. Stratton has written to Mr. Vane's publishers, and to the directories and to 2 gentlemen of the Society of Antiquaries. No one has met Mr. Vane. No one can produce him. There is some suggestion that Mr. Vane is convenient, a name on a contract and nothing behind it. His eyes came up to hers, and there was something terrible in them, which was not anger, but the beginning of the old, taut, weary belief that everyone in the end was performing. I will ask you plainly, because I find I cannot bear not to. Who is Mr. Vane? And here was the choice, arriving in a room with a solicitor's pen poised over it, and her whole livelihood in the balance. For to name herself was to hand Crispin Stratton the very weapon he had come for. The announcement that the celebrated Mr. Vane was a woman, which would void her testimony against his forgery before she could give it, ruin the 4 honest books behind her, and end the only life she had managed to build. She could lie. She could let Vane stay a convenient ghost and be quietly dismissed, and Crispin's charter would surface in a year, and Edenhall would pass, and no one would ever know she had held the truth in her hand and let go of it to save herself. There is no Mr. Vane, Eleanor said. The solicitor's pen stopped. There never was. I wrote the books, I did the work and the walking and the Latin, and I put a man's name on the spine because the booksellers told me, kindly, that a woman's would not sell, and a clergyman's daughters would be laughed at. I am vain, Your Grace. I have been vain for 6 years, and I will tell you something else your cousin has been very anxious I should not have the standing to say. She turned to Crispin, who had gone very still by the window. There is a forged charter in the Edenhall chest, settling that manor on your line, sealed with a matrix that did not exist for 30 years after its date. I have it under lock. You put it there. And you wrote to the antiquaries about Mr. Vane not because you doubted him, but because you had met Miss Ward and seen her read a seal, and understood that the one person in England who could hang your forgery was a woman whose name you could break with a single letter to a newspaper. Lady Stroud in the doorway made a sound that was almost a laugh. The Duke did not move, and Crispin Stratton smiled, and Eleanor saw that she had not won anything at all. She had only made him stop pretending. His second move he made the next morning, in front of everyone, because a man like Crispin understood that a truth spoken in a library can be smothered, but a scandal spoken before guests cannot be put back. The breakfast room was full, the house guests, the magistrate Sir Henry Combe, who had dined there twice, the Dowager, the Duke. Crispin came in with a folded newspaper proof and a charter case, and the easy grief of a man performing duty against his heart. It pains me, he told the room, more than I can say, but I cannot in conscience let my cousin be deceived under his own roof. He set the charter on the table. Here is a document, lately found, that touches the descent of Edenhall. Found, I should say, in the very chest this woman was set to catalogue, and which she has kept under her own lock, and called a forgery, conveniently, the moment it proved inconvenient to his grace. And here, he laid the proof beside it, is tomorrow's notice, which I have already paid to have set, informing the public that the antiquarian Mr. Aldous Vane, whose learning we have all admired, is a fiction got up by an unmarried woman of no family to defraud the trade. Both these things are true, Sir Henry. I leave you to judge which of us this room should believe, a Stratton of Calderwood, or a tradeswoman who lies for her bread in a borrowed name. It was very nearly perfect. Eleanor watched the magistrate's face close, watched the guest's eyes slide away from her as from something already convicted, watched even the footman find the floor. A woman at the end of the table murmured the word adventurous to her neighbour behind a raised hand, just loud enough, and the neighbour nodded, and Eleanor felt the verdict settle over the room like a cloth dropped over a cage. This was the part she knew. This was the oldest room in the world to her, older than any in the muniments. The room where the truth stood holding its evidence, and the world looked instead at the cut of its coat and decided. She had stood in it when her father died, and the living was given to a man who could not pass a Latin tag she had construed at 12. She had stood in it at every publisher's desk. She had taught herself never to weep in it, because weeping was what they waited for, the proof that you were what they said. Her hand closed on her father's glass on its ribbon, the bone warm from her skin, and she thought, with a calm that frightened her, that she had been here before, in smaller rooms, and had always lost. Then the Duke of Calderwood stood, and the room turned to him for its cue the way it always had, and he looked at Eleanor and not at his cousin, and he said, "Miss Ward, you have the glass round your neck. Show them the seal." She had been bracing to be defended. She was not prepared to be handed the floor. For one heartbeat she only stared at him, at the man who had every reason to let his cousin's tidier story stand, who could marry the deception away and keep his Edenhall and his dignity, and never have his hall's lie spoken aloud again. And she saw that he had chosen, in front of his magistrate and his guests and his heir, to want the truth from her more than he wanted his peace. It undid her more than any tenderness could have. "Your Grace," she said, and her voice did not shake. "You needn't look at me like that. I am not going to spare you, and you are not going to rescue me. There is a seal on that table that cannot exist, and either this room can read Latin or it cannot. Send for candles and bring it here." She took up the forged charter, and she set her father's glass to it, and she made them come, the magistrate first. Then, helplessly the rest, and she showed them. The hand is good. The Latin is good. The date says 1660, the year the king came home. Her finger moved to the wax. This is the seal of the See of Carlisle. I have published the only catalogue of its matrices that exists. You may find it under the name Vane in any subscription library in the north. And you will find that this particular die, with this broken letter in the legend, "Here, Sir Henry, put your own eye to it," was cut by the goldsmith Anthony Reeve in the year 1691, 31 years after the date this charter claims for itself. A document cannot be sealed with a thing that will not be made for 3 decades. This is not an old deed, it is a new lie in an old coat. And it was made by a man who knew enough history to forge it, and not enough to know that a clergyman's daughter would be the one to read it. She set the glass down. "I kept it under my own lock, Sir Henry, because I knew the moment it left my hand it would vanish. Ask yourself who in this house had cause to make Edenhall his. It is not the woman who is paid 50 guineas to leave in the spring." The magistrate looked a long time through the glass. Then he looked up at Crispin Stratton, and the whole room moved its weight from one foot to the other, and the thing turned, all at once, the way these things do when they turn. Crispin reached, too late for the charter. The Duke's hand was already flat upon it. "You will go to your rooms, cousin," the Duke said, very quietly. "And you will be gone before the seal on this is cold, and you will be grateful every day of your life that I would rather not hang my own blood. Sir Henry has seen what he has seen." He did not raise his voice once. It was, Eleanor thought, the most frightening thing she had watched him do, and the most beautiful, and she was in a great deal of trouble. The room emptied of magistrate and guests and disgraced heir, herded out by Lady Stroud, who paused at the door to fix Eleanor with one glittering eye and say, "I told you." Not recovered. Never will be. And pull the door shut behind her with a click. And then it was the two of them, and a forged charter, and the long light of the breakfast room. And the Duke came round the table, and stopped a single foot from her, close enough that she could see the ink that was always, now, faintly on his fingers too, and he did not touch her. "I have spent my whole life," he said, "in rooms full of people agreeing with me, and I have been lonelier than I knew how to say. And then a woman I had never met set down her spoon and told me my own house was a lie, and walked away before I could learn her name. Eleanor, it was the first time he had used it, and it landed in her like a struck bell. I do not want a duchess who will yes me. I have had that offered, and it is a slow death. I want the only person in England who looked at the thing I was proudest of and told me the truth at the cost of herself. Marry me, be Vane on the spines, and Eleanor at my table, and the terror of every antiquary in the kingdom. And correct me, God willing, every single day until I die. You are a duke, she said, because someone had to, and I am a tradeswoman who lies for her bread in a borrowed name. Your cousin said so this morning, and half the county will print it by Friday. Then let them print that the Duke of Calderwood married Vane, he said, and spend the rest of his life being right less often. I find I can bear the scandal. I cannot bear the door. You reached it once already, and I have thought of nothing else for 6 weeks but the back of you going through it. His hand came up, at last, and touched her jaw with the unbearable care of a man handling something 600 years old and irreplaceable. Don't reach it again. She did not. She closed the foot of distance herself, because she had spent her whole life being the one who acted and saw no reason to stop now, and she kissed the Duke of Calderwood in his breakfast room with her father's reading glass pressed between them and ink on both their hands. And it was not careful, and it was not seemly, and it was the truest thing she had ever done without a document to prove it. They were married before the first snow, in the chapel at Calderwood, and the new charter for Edenhall was settled again, properly and publicly, on the Duke's own line, was drawn in Eleanor's hand and witnessed in her own name. Eleanor Stratton, Duchess of Calderwood, formerly Vane, with no apology made for either. Crispin Stratton was not hanged. He was sent, with a small allowance and a large silence, to a cousin's plantation in the Indies, where the climate was understood to be very trying. He wrote twice asking for more money and was not answered, and the sea kept him, which was more mercy than he had meant for anyone. A year on, almost to the day, the Duke came into the muniment room of a winter morning, and found his wife at the long table with her sleeves pinned back and her father's glass to her eye. And beside her, on the wall where the founding charter had hung for 100 years, telling its handsome lie, a small new brass plate had gone up beneath it, giving the true date, the true name, the true and unheroic fact of Edmund Falke, who had held these acres and died for the losing side. Eleanor had insisted on it. A house that could not bear its own history, she had told him, did not deserve to keep its land. "You've hung our shame in the hall," the Duke said, coming to stand behind her chair, his ink-stained hand on her shoulder. "I've hung the truth in the hall," she said, not looking up from the deed under her glass. "It is only shame if you'd rather have been lied to. Would you?" He thought about it, because she had taught him to think before he agreed, which was the great labor and joy of his married life. "No," he said at last, and bent and kissed the top of her bent, severe, ink-smudged head. "No, tell me what you're reading. Tell me what I'm wrong about today." And she lifted the glass and made room for him at the table and told him,